Ahoy, everyone, and welcome to Joysticks, the podcast where I talk to game designers about the most joyful thing about making games for them. Today, I am with the incomparable Tyler Crumrine, who is best known for Beak, Feather, and Bone. Welcome, Tyler.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. It's been a long time coming since we sat in a coffee shop and talked about games
what
and
joysticks
gaming.
should be. Yeah, for sure. Yes, everyone listening out there, Tyler is one of the people who helped make joysticks a thing. So many thanks to Tyler. Absolutely.
Yeah, because we're both in the creative center of the world, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the hotbed of...
Yeah.
Yeah.
The biggest of apples. The city of brotherly love.
Keep going.
The Sunshine State.
Yeah.
All of those things. We're known for so many things that aren't crumbling infrastructure here.
Yeah, absolutely. For all of those not watching, my face is sincere. But so I will open with the point of this podcast, which is, Tyler, what is the most joyful thing about making games for you?
You know, I have had the luxury of thinking about this some as a fan of the podcast. And I think, and this is something that has been a bit of a hobby horse of mine recently beyond just role-playing games, which is my area of expertise. But starting to think about other games, video games, board games, card games. I play a lot of trading card games, in part because I like to explore other kinds of games mechanics and think about how they might be applied to role-playing games, storytelling games. And I have really found that the thing that I think is most satisfying and enjoyable about designing games, playing games, selling games is discovery. I really like the feeling of someone feeling like they're onto something. I really like when someone has a hunch. And I think that games can do that in a very interesting way. So a good example, part of why I think this in terms of trading card games is because trading card game is very good at synergy and figuring out strategies and combos and if I played this card, it lets me do this fun thing with this other card. And part of the reason why people get really into deck building card games is they'll get a hunch about oh, I bet if I played this card that made 12 treasure tokens and then played this card that would get me to this thing, then it'll let me do this loop or it'll let me do this cool thing.
Sure.
And it's very satisfying to find that hunch is correct, to be validated in your own creativity and your own kind of ability to figure it out, to figure out something that, you can do that you didn't think you could do before or that you didn't realize you could do before. And the same thing applies to role-playing games. I come from a devised theater background, which devised theater is unlike the typical theater making process where you have a playwright who writes a script and you deliver it to a team of a director and lighting designer and actors and all that kind of stuff. Devised theater is it's almost like an improv game, but you get everyone a creative team together. And you can start from different points of hey, maybe we have a theme that we're working around, or maybe we have a draft of a script, or these other different ways of maybe we're just starting from nothing. Maybe we just want to have a conversation and see what goes from there. But devised theater is this process of people discovering a story together and then kind of codifying it into a script, into something that they can share with a multitude of people. When I'm playing role-playing games or when I'm playtesting role-playing games, a lot of times what I look for is that moment of a player discovering either their own creativity of oh, I didn't think that I could do this. I didn't think that I would be able to contribute in this way, or that I had these ideas in me. Or a similar feeling of a game that is underway, and this could be a GM'd game, a GM-less game, but where a story plot line comes up and someone latches onto it, where they're like, hold on, I think that this is important. I think that this is something that is worth building on or making callbacks to. And when someone discovers a literal storyline and follows that line to its logical conclusion, they're validated in that hunch of like, I think that there's more here. And when they find more there, like so much of the work of a game master is identifying, all right, what are my players interested in? How can I like frustrate expectations, but also build them towards something that like gives them a reward for their own creativity, for their own problem solving, etc. So all of that is a long-winded way of saying that it's very clear that I come from theater because I will monologue about any given game design topic or mechanic given the opportunity.
No, I think one of them, first of all, I love this answer because it is so... There is no play without discovery.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's sort of like this precursor. And you don't realize that it's happening, but there is a moment of, I think I could do this, and the play is trying it out.
Yeah.
Right? Like, playing around is trying out what you think may or may not be possible, and discovery is the sort of like the foundational part of that. But what I was also thinking about while you were saying this is how, especially when you are improvising something, how deeply satisfying it is to commit to the bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so many games are predicated on... I mean, it was interesting to hear you talk about the hunch in this specific way, because when I think about the hunch, I think about poker and how important, you know, the hunch is, and seeing what that means to play out in specific scenarios of probability. But here you're talking about a hunch like, I think this could be fun. Mm-hmm. And like, that's this other level, I think, of hunch when we're talking about discovering something. I guess my next question for you then is, are you in like a meta discovery? Like, are you discovering people discovering things, and then you're like, oh, that would help make this game bigger, or like make the narratives larger, or...
Yeah, and I think that that's also part of what makes game design so tricky, you know, because there are different levels of engagement that people want and expect from a game, you know. There are some people that are intimidated by a game that asks too much of them. Like, they do not want to be put in a position where they're like, well, I don't know what to do here. You know, part of giving someone the ability to discover something is having something there to be discovered, or kind of like throwing out the line for them to kind of catch on to. A lot of it is kind of the yes-anding of improv, whether that is improvised storytelling within the context of a role-playing game or something else, of like, you can only yes and if there is something for you to respond to, you know, or even like no but, like, is also valid.
Very helpful.
And so a lot of times when I am thinking about systems design, I am thinking about what is the mechanic that I am providing with someone, providing to someone to get them to the next beat, you know, to get them to the place of their own creativity. And sometimes, you know, it is numbers. It's the randomization of dice of like, all right, these are the probability values of like, if I map these things to these numbers and say that like the dice is what's telling you yes or no, and you're deciding what spin you put on it. Or for something that is more free form, I've really enjoyed the trend of games using tarot cards Because tarot is something that has a lot of meaning divorced from games, has a long history of imagery, all these different kind of things, but is also attached to numbers, attached to probability. You have this, how many cards are in a tarot deck?
78.
I think like 78, yeah. But you have a fixed probability. You have higher or lower numbers. You have a variety of suits. But you also have the intangible things of like the Fool means this. Judgment means this. Cups are understood to mean this. And all the different ways that you can kind of key into those inspiration points that the mechanics of a game can provide to be like, all right, here are the different threads you could pull at. You could pull at the, this went good, what does good look like? Or you can pull at the, this went good, but it is attached to a card that represents death. You know, what does that mean for you? And sometimes it's a bit of challenge by choice of players deciding like, all right, I just want to engage with this facet, or I want to engage with this other facet. And the trick is giving people enough that they can reliably build on that process. You know, play testing for different player experience groups, for different cultures of play, and seeing like, all right, does this game consistently work without getting into that other denying of discovery, which is the complaint that so many players have about like GM campaigns that railroad them into specific decisions, where they don't feel like they had a moment of discovery or agency, or they don't feel like they had a hunch that they could chase down because the game is doing so much either mechanically that is kind of working you through the clockwork of a machine, or is so fixed narratively where someone feels like, well, I was just receiving a story. I was not participating in it. So sometimes it is like that trying to get to that Goldilocks moment in a game is the hard thing about design, but is also the joyful thing about design. Because you can tell when someone like gets that grin where they feel like they're the one in control, or they feel like they're getting one over on the game. And it's exciting to see that. And it's exciting to see that glint in people's eyes when they're like, I'm in control now. I am part of this team. I am like part of the game design cohort because I am creating this story in conjunction with the game and its designer.
The first thing that comes to mind is We Are Legion. But also, I think initially it's so easy to see role-playing games as I am in the story. But the more you play them, I think the more you understand I am in the story and the story is in me.
Yeah.
And having the ability to have both of those happen at the same time is really the balance that you strike with the glint in someone's eye that's like, I'm going to try this. And also, I know the limit of the game and it should be XYZ.
Yeah.
Also known as shenanigans.
Yeah. I'm grateful to be in a position where I've been doing game design full-time for about 5 years. Before that, I was a full-time theater freelancer for 10. So I've been a full-time creative for like 15 years. I'm really only able to successfully run an RPG company because of all of the mistakes and things that I learned while working in a completely different creative field for, a third of my life. But along with that, I've been lucky to be in a number of mentorship positions, whether for other designers or I teach occasionally, usually once an academic calendar, but sometimes it just doesn't work with my schedule. I'll teach a semester-long course on tabletop role-playing game design at Carnegie Mellon University. And a lot of what comes up is play testing practices, demoing practices. How do I communicate my game to people in as effective a way as possible? And sometimes that is under the auspice of capitalism, of like, I am going to be at a convention and I want to be able to demo this in the shortest amount of time. Or someone is feeling like, well, I want to play test this, but I only have this space for so long and it's dragging. I'm not getting to the part that I want to see if it works or not. All these different kinds of things. And so my advice to a lot of people when they're asking, like, how can I figure out if I have that discovery moment to my game? How can I figure out if I'm going to get that glint in the eye or not? Is to stack the deck. Whenever I demo games so if someone comes and sees me at a convention and I am demoing Beak, Feather, and Bone, I am almost certainly doing this. Beak, Feather, and Bone is a game where you have a deck of cards, a standard deck of cards, and depending on the card that you draw, it'll tell you what the next building on a map that you're coloring in to claim buildings, what purpose it'll serve. So it can be like a financial purpose, a social purpose, a past purpose, or a future purpose. Past and future purpose, they make sense within the larger context of the game, but they're a bit more advanced things to wrap your brain around in a couple seconds. There are face cards that have alternate rules, things like that. There's a whole system to how you can randomize different elements of the game. But if I am showing someone the game, I will stack the deck, usually so that there is a hearts or a diamond, usually a hearts and then a diamond, on the very top of the deck. I will, in like 10 seconds, be like, hey, of these pictures, which faction do you want to play? I fully know that the next card is going to be a diamond. I will pull it off, and I will say that the next building you claim serves a social purpose. So that would be like housing, entertainment, etc. Pick a building, color it in, and tell me it's Beak, Feather, and Bone. What it's like on the outside, what it's like on the inside, what its reputation is. Although really reputation comes first with the Beak stuff. And because I streamline them to that moment where they are the one inventing or they are the one making a choice, it immediately clicks what the promise of the game is, what like the loop of the game is, and how they are able to engage with the game and make it their own, which is something that is a lot easier to do, I'll admit, in these kind of more free-form, less like long-form GM'd gaming style things. But like when I'm playtesting other games or designing other games, I will try and figure out like, all right, how can I get to that place as quickly as possible to see whether or not it resonates with players? Because as a game designer, I think the best thing that I can do is like a good layup in volleyball so that the player is the one who actually spikes it and feels pride in their ability to do that, even if someone else helped set up the situation for them to succeed.
Sure. Well, and that is the premise, right? You're saying, here's the moment of discovery. Are you going to take it or not? Right? Yeah. You're laying up the moment of discovery, and they get to uncover it and, spike it, dunk it, what have you.
And the same thing is true of like teaching game design. One of the things that I really like about my class when I teach it at CMU is that it is intentionally open to all majors. CMU has a game design master's program. It's kind of wrapped up into their larger entertainment technology center. They have a game design minor, but this course is a portal course. So anyone can take it from like, there's no prerequisites. If they like it a lot, they can use it as a credit that will like help them work towards the game design minor. And so I have some people who take the course that are looking to create a portfolio piece. They're like, hey, I want to be a professional game designer. By the end of this class, I want to have something that I can show off. And there are just as many, if not more, people who take the class because it sounded more interesting than pottery. And they're like, well, it's an elective, like other people like it. Sure, I'll take it. And so weighing in my mind that it is an equally valid outcome of this class for someone to have career development and for someone to say, wasn't that a fun thing I did once in college? I made a game once.
Hell yeah.
I am a game designer, looking back and being like, they don't have to publish it. They don't have to distribute it. But it's equally as valid for someone to, go home over Thanksgiving break and play test their game with their family and be like, oh my gosh, that was so cool. I never thought I could do something like that. And a lot of how I teach is also helping people to reach that point of discovering that it is something that they are capable of as well. And so in a lot of ways, I am constantly playtesting my course to be like, how can I guarantee that people get to that realization sooner so that, by midterms, they're just willing and able to make big swings and are not still in the back of their head about how do I get an A or, I'm not good enough to do this or those different kinds of things.
Are you turning people into artists, Tyler, against their will?
I hope it's not against their will. I hope they're taking the course with an understanding.
Against their, what is it? Like, without them knowing. I mean, that is kind of, I don't know, I feel like I talked, when I spoke to Banana Chan, like, I was talking to them about how sometimes art is a byproduct of playing a game.
Yeah.
And for some of those games, it's on purpose.
Yeah.
And, but I feel like the thing that happens inside of you is always the byproduct of playing a game. Is always like the art part that happens. Because ideally, you are suspending some kind of disbelief. You are taking some kind of risk, even if it feels small on your, scale level of magnitude of risk. You are fundamentally creating a byproduct of knowing yourself better.
Yeah, I think, and it's like, it's an extension of a larger worldview as well, if I can get in my English major bag for a little bit. So
please do. I'm going in the bag too.
Yeah, I am not someone with a formal games education. I really was an English and literature major for the longest time until I really fell in love with theater and kind of was like, okay, how can I see if I can build a career out of this? And that's a whole different story. But one of the books that I read in college and I really enjoyed, it's been a long time now, so I can't fully vouch for the book. It's by a Southern author, so there's probably something bad in there, just based on the time that it was written. But Walker Percy is someone who I really liked his novels. I especially liked his novel, The Moviegoer. And so a lot of people kind of know Walker Percy as a writer who converted to Christianity late in life. But even before that, he was writing novels that were kind of trying to sort through existentialism and kind of like meaning of life, something he identified as the malaise, which the idea of the malaise was like, hey, everyone's just kind of like going through the motions, and the thing that he identified as like his kind of cure for the malaise, the thing that kept him moving, was specifically something he called the search. And there's a quote from the book. I'm just going to go ahead and read it because it's something that really stuck with me.
Please do.
Years and years after, regardless of if I ever read this book again or if there's any kind of like things in it that are maybe speak to a worldview that I don't espouse as much anymore. But what is the nature of the search, you ask? The search is what anyone would undertake if he were not sunk in the everydayness of his own life. To become aware of the search is to be onto something. to not be onto something is to be in despair. And I really like that kind of dovetails into this feeling of games that give you a hunch, you know, games that break you out of everyday life. That, you know, despair is feeling like you kind of know everything you need to know or ever will know. Like you have a limit of like, well, I'm not a game designer. I'm this kind of person. Or I'm not a storyteller. I'm this kind of person. Or I'm not a story gamer. I'm a trad gamer. Or I'd never play a visual novel. I'm all about like Twitch action first person shooters. You know, kind of the idea that like the more someone's idea of themselves calcifies and the more their idea about the world calcifies, the more they feel this malaise. And I think that it situates us to kind of be searching a lot of the time. Sometimes that will manifest in religion, you know, to feel like, all right, I am on to something here. And this is something that gives me hope. I also think it's part of what primes people to be like influenced by propaganda. It's what kind of sets people up for like a logical extension would be cult behavior or QAnon of like, yeah, I really think that I'm onto something. And because
and
people because people are feeding me this, I feel like I'm on the search. And sometimes like people are in it for the search, you know? They're not really as interested in the answers as much as just this feeling of like, I think I'm onto something. I think that there's something else here. And I've been reading a book by Annalee Newitz. It's called Stories Are Weapons. And I knew Annalee Newitz as a science fiction author. She has a book called, I think it's called Autonomous, that is in part about like a robot falling in love with a human, and is in part about prescription copyright pirating. It's like a future of like, oh, healthcare is inexpensive. And so like the biggest criminals are people who are 3D printing like ibuprofen because it's, you know, locked under a trademark and no one can afford it. So she is someone that is like very tapped into the idea of stories being something that can advocate for social, political change, etc. And also the power of, you know, negative stories in the sense of propaganda, things like that. Like if you think of the, you know, the contemporary MAGA movement, a lot of it is world building. You know,
100%.
It's like, oh, we are constructing a worldview that not only explains the present, but predicts the future and the past of like, these things happen because of these bad actors.
Yes.
Or this thing happening will mean this. Or we are on the path to this other thing. And so as a game designer, you know, there's a lot of, I think, responsibility to the stories that we tell and the stories that we enable people to tell for themselves. Which isn't to say that every game has to have any degree of moralizing in it. But I think that enabling people to ask questions, interrogate, to like see themselves as something more and as something like as able to be creative and to invent things rather than just kind of consuming and regurgitating a worldview that's been created for them is really important.
Yeah, I would very much agree with that. I think we are in a time where I think a lot of folks believe that they are inside of a story that has already been written.
Yeah.
and that they are somehow not able to participate in changing it. And
which is the same reason why like gambling has taken off now in a huge way. Not just in terms of like betting apps and things like that, but as someone who's a fan of playing trading card games and doesn't really give a shit about collecting them, it's really hard to like get games now, like booster packs for One Piece or Gundam or Pokemon, because there is a scalper's market of people who buy up like packs and packs of the cards because they're hoping to get the one really rare card that they'll be able to like flip. And it's, you know, it's a result of a culture where everyone feels like the story has already been written. It is a result of a culture that no longer feels like the American promise of like anyone can do anything with enough hard work. Like, no, my social class and my financial bracket has kind of been decided for me since the day I was born. And the best way for me to change my life is not to like go through the motions, but it is to play the slots and be like, well, if it is a 0.0001% that my college degree will get me the job it promised me, then why put 4 years into that when I can just play a lot of scratch offs over the course of 4 years and it's still the same odds, but like, come on, it's $5 a pop. And I think that like that is kind of the danger of, you know, the post-modernity of like, well, you can read any novel today and not only, you know everything about like the conditions that led to its creation, but you can go and read the author's tweets more often than not, or whatever they're calling posts on Blue Sky now. And it's very easy to kind of like, now that we have the tools of literary criticism that have spread into every part of our lives, of not just seeing a story and understanding it as like, this is what the story was telling me, but they're like, well, this is in the context of these notes that this person wrote and they're from this, you know, area. And I feel like some people have gotten so heavy into the deconstruction of this is what this thing came from. I can explain it because I understand this kind of person and I understand this kind of factor and I understand this place they're coming from. And because there is so much information that everyone has access to, it can kind of be like this safety blanket to feel like I understand enough to be protected from the world because nothing about it will surprise me. And surprise is scary. And I think that games can help people see like the joy of discovery, the joy of surprise, which is a lot of what, you know, any kind of art form is trying to do, of like shake people loose from what they're expecting, whether it is like a plot twist in a movie or a piece of art in a gallery that hits you in a way that makes you think of something that like, oh, I never would have thought this unless I encountered this, or at the very least, it wouldn't dawn to me until who knows how long from now.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of focus. I mean, of course, discourse is so real, and I mean, we could get into a lot of things here, like the expert, and like so I could do 11 different podcasts with you, Tyler. But
I know that's what we were in for. Like, this is how all of our conversations have gone.
But the one thing that I have really noticed, especially with things like, I do watch a lot of live actual plays and watch a lot of what is scripted media, just TV, etc. but what people really get attached to is the behind the scenes stuff, and is the like, oh, this was unscripted, or like, oh, they didn't know this was going to happen. And games are that. It's just that, because you have no idea what's going to happen. And so, like, people get really attached to these moments, and they feel like they are... That is the other thing that's happening here, is there's this, like, deep thirst for authenticity. And, like, because you have, like, AI slop over here, and then you have pure authenticity over here. And so it's, like, people have this, like, real... I think that they are deeply venerating this level of, like, oh, they didn't mean for it to happen, or oh, it was unplanned, or oh, it just happened because that's like because these guys are so good, or whatever. And it's just like this recap of this thing that happened by accident.
I would say that is a kind of hunch.
Exactly.
That is someone feeling like they're onto something. When they know that, like, oh, how many people have shared the anecdote of, like, oh, in this scene of Lord of the Rings, Aragorn kicked the helmet and broke his toe.
Oh my God.
Like, that is kind of one of those fun facts that, like, when you watch that scene, like, you're onto something. Like, you know more. You understand it in a different context. And it also gives you, like, people love sharing that bit of trivia because it is kind of like, it is like the virality of discovery,
But
of, like, when someone's... Yeah, go ahead. I was just going to say, like, I was about to pivot it a little bit to a game design exercise that I do. So if you have anything else...
Well, I was just going to say, there is this moment of discovery that also invites people. That's like, come with me. Like, oh, did you hear about this thing? That's like this, like, oh, like Viggo Mortensen broke his toe. And he did, and it's like, are you onto it too? Yeah. Are you coming?
Yeah,
right?
Which is in part, like, that's a way of community building.
Yeah.
Like, we're all in on it. We're all in on the joke. Or, like, we all, like, understand this at a level that, lets us have a shared vocabulary and a shared understanding and a shared worldview, even if that worldview is, how we view the story of a film or dissect the creation of it. But I think that you need to understand kind of systems, whether it's in game design or it's in, like, art, filmmaking, etc. You kind of have to, in some context, know it well enough to know the exception to the norm, right? Mm-hmm. So the people who kind of, like, pick up on, like, oh, yeah, you kicked the helmet. Like, part of what's interesting is that you understand the way films are made enough, or you understand the way that it's presented, that you're like, that's not how it's supposed to happen. Like, actors aren't supposed to break their toes, or if you are playing a game, like, you can really only be thrilled by a super unlikely role or a bit of, like, improv that, like, gets us somewhere, or, like, a blooper or something like that, if you understand the context enough to know when something is occurring outside of it, or when something super unlikely is happening. So when I teach my role-playing game course, like I said, it's an active play testing. And the first time I taught the course, I thought I was going to be the super cool professor exposing players to the kinds of role-playing games they had never played before. Because I was like, everyone's going to be coming into this class thinking, like, D&D, Stranger Things, Baldur's Gate 3, etc. I'm going to introduce them to GM-less games and story games and, like, shared floating GM games and things like that. And the students really took to that. They're like, oh my gosh, this is really cool. But then when I got to the second half of the course, and it's like, well, now that you know what games can be, like, now's your opportunity to make whatever kind of game that you want. And I introduced, like, over the course of the class, a toolkit of different things that you can do. Like here's how different games do character creation or randomization, or these are GM'd games. And what I found is that no one was making those traditional kinds of role-playing games. No one was making a game that had a GM because they didn't feel like they understood it well enough. Everything that we had played in class and everything that I put the most time and energy into was being like, oh, here's the difference from the norm, when I didn't realize just how much they were lacking in the basics. And so even if they really liked the idea of a GM'd game, they're like, I don't know that I understand enough to design around one, or even if I did, I don't know if I'd be a good enough GM to play test it. So this led to the creation of an exercise. My friend Teddy helped me work it out some, who's another game designer here in Pittsburgh, where the very first game that we play in the class is Werewolf. The classic, everyone sit in a circle, you tap their heads, like once for werewolf, once for sheriff, once for doctor. And you explain like, all right, the werewolf, put heads down, they can kill someone. Sheriff, while everyone's heads are down, they can pick someone to get a shake of the head, yes or no, from the GM, which is like the facilitator of the game, whether that person's a werewolf, and then the doctor can try and save someone. So we play a couple rounds of Werewolf, and we start with just like, all right, you all know this game. If you don't, here's how to play it. We play around, someone dies in the middle of the night, and heads up, and like, all right, who do you think the werewolf is? They all vote, and then someone else is executed. And the werewolf's still around, so it's like, all right, let's play another round. The second round, I'm like, all right, so you've seen how I've been facilitating this. I've been the one who's saying, heads up, werewolf, who would you like to kill? Heads down. Sheriff, heads up, who do you think's the werewolf? Heads down. So you understand the facilitator role. Now we're going to add a bit more of the narrative to it. So we would do the voting, and a person had been selected to be the person killed that night. I'm like, all right, everyone heads up. Now, let's say it's Elena. Elena, you are asleep in your cabin. Tell us a bit about who you are, what the inside of your cabin looks like. And the person invents some stuff for their character, and I'm like, okay, you hear a scratching at the window. What do you do? And they're like, well, my first thing is like I grab, my poker, etc. And I'm like, all right, so kind of guide them to this point where the werewolf breaks in and attacks them. And they're lying on the floor bleeding out. And I'm like, oh, but just in time, the village doctor, there's been enough of an uproar that they show up at your door and the werewolf runs away and they revive you. So mechanically, it is that the doctor selected them so the werewolf couldn't kill them. But it's walking them through kind of, all right, the game's rules are all the same, but here's how we attach a narrative to it. Then we get to the voting stage and I tell everyone, all right, now everyone invent a little bit of a character for yourself. Try and in person make arguments for who you think the werewolf is, et cetera, et cetera. And so we play the game on for a bit like this. And the last thing that I reveal to the players when the game is done, and classmates who are not participating in the game have known this in the entire time. They've been sworn to secrecy. Anyone who died, like, they also get to have their eyes open. But I've been cheating the whole time. I picked myself as the doctor during the tapping phase. And so I have been strategically stacking the deck. I have been deciding when someone dies or survives precisely so that I can walk them through my example of play.
Sure.
And when I reveal that to them at the end, the question I ask is like, how much do you feel betrayed by this? Because you did not, like, when I explained the rules to the game to you, I never specifically said I couldn't do this, but I strongly implied that I was communicating everything you needed to know about the game to you. And that is kind of like part of game design, of making sure that when you communicate the rules to someone, they understand them well enough that they don't feel like the game is able to trick them. They can feel like players are able to trick them. They can feel like the odds can go in or against their favor, but they really can only have the satisfaction of engaging with the game on its own terms if they feel like the game is like a trustworthy part of the process. And so sometimes like game design is figuring out what do people get like excited about, invested in, and how can a game make sure that they know those options are available to them, while also being airtight enough that, you know, something else can't just come out of left field and completely destroy their worldview.
Yeah.
You know, because going back to like people who have a hunch about like whatever, that are in a cult or something like that, oftentimes like when you can bring proof and evidence to someone and say that like, well, technically just, you know, you can needle them, but the more they feel like they had a really strong hold, the more they're just going to kind of shut down and reject it. And I feel like there are a lot of tables that, because there isn't a clear enough communication either from the game of what is or isn't possible or where we're going together, or between players having conversations of like, do we want this to be a romance or a comedy or a horror or what have you, that they react really negatively when everyone's playing Call of Cthulhu, but they get to session 1 and 3 people are like, we want to do a goofy, campy, you know, like actual play improviser style thing. And someone else was like, I'm here for cosmic horror.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, which is why everyone have a session 0, please. But also I do feel like there is, at least in some role-playing games in particular, there is a lot of responsibility on the game master to also be, to not only run the game, but be the rules of the game.
Yeah.
Especially with, you know, campaign things, certain rule systems, etc. And you do get to this very interesting place with players about, I guess what I would call it belief, right? Because you can have no belief without discovery. Where folks are, well, like for instance, anytime you have a problem at a table, you, as a game master, 9 times out of 10, it has nothing to do with the game. Right? Yep. Has nothing to do with how the mechanics work or how things roll or whatever it is. It is something that should be addressed above the table.
Yeah.
Right? But depending on what people believe the game is supposed to be, they could think that it is not above the table. Right? Yeah. And solving problems between players at the table is one thing, but solving problems with the game, like itself, usually happens, at least for me, above the table. Because it's like, if something happens in your game that's like, I really don't think that's the game that we're playing, that we all agreed to play, and I feel that some people are uncomfortable playing it like this. Or some people feel betrayed by the other people playing the game because, for instance, they did want cosmic horror, and someone did come with their weird little guy.
Yeah.
And so reconciling that inside of the game system, I have found 10 out of 10 times is not your answer. And that the game is never really, maybe that's too strong, but never, mechanics are never provided to determine what people should believe about the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think that there's some of it comes down to, you know, the different styles of play.
Sure.
If someone is looking for, I forget exactly where it tracks back to.
It tracks back to?
Yeah, I don't know where that came
That's
from.
great.
A trained actor.
We can switch. Switch again.
The idea of like three types of players. You have the gamist player, which is someone who's like, all right, I want to make the machine work. Like the satisfying thing is for me to play and win the game. You have the narrativist player, someone who's kind of story over all else. Like, let's break the rules if we need to achieve the goal of telling the story. And the simulationist player, who's like, all right, the pleasure that I get out of this game is being able to reliably recreate a life that is like other than my own. It's the people who get really into knowing exactly how much weight their horse can carry in a game, because they're like, okay, this is such a facsimile that if I understand the world enough, or if I understand myself enough, I can like get the actions I want within this simulation. Which kind of like dovetails into the gamist stuff, but it's not always like victory as the goal as much as like rigor that people kind of find satisfaction in. So some of it is just like, all right, do you have an understanding at your table that the goal of the game is to tell the best story possible? Or is the goal of the table to be like, let's follow the rules to the letter? And I think that like there are perfectly good reasons to do both. Something that I really enjoy that my friend Will Yobst got me into, Will is also a game designer here in Pittsburgh, is kind of like archaeological play. Like, let's take an old RPG and follow the rules to the letter and kind of get rid of our presuppositions that we know better than the game, and just like play it as written. And sometimes there's really interesting the discovery that comes from that. Other times it's the discovery is like, yeah, no, and that's why people don't play this game anymore. So part of it is just having an understanding of what kind of game, like, are we playing a game or are we telling a story? And it can be like a balance of both, but like having an understanding that the story comes first is what makes people not feel betrayed by fudged rolls, or something like that. Because they trust you that like, oh, you're trying to tell the game, or you're trying to tell the story, you're not operating as a referee in this context. So sometimes it really is just kind of having that above the table conversation of, all right, do we want to, like, are we crafting something with random elements? Right. Or are we just kind of doing more of like a divining exercise where we see what the universe tells us?
Well, and understanding, what I've also found is understanding what the best story possible means to each individual person becomes very interesting, because I have had players who are queer who are like, I really don't want my character to die. Like, please don't kill this queer person. I have enough of that in my life, right? Yeah. And I have other people that are like, the thrill comes from the fact that I could die.
Yeah.
And so balancing out the realism of possible death or, destruction or a deep alteration of what you believe the story will uncover for you as a person versus I can remain with a certain level of, I wouldn't even call it comfort. It's more like my belief in the story has a certain level that I trust someone will not try to essentially penetrate, right? You're saying, we're here. But I in games, I have always sort of believed that people would want the same thing, and they certainly do not. Huge disparity in what people want playing the same exact game.
And I think that it's, part of it is I am not a like a beggar talk person. Which I don't know. This is a hashtag on TikTok. I think TikTok
Okay.
is like, uh, you know, compromised by the NSA or something now that it's gone through so many different things. But for a while there, TikTok was one of the ascendant platforms for like RPG discovery, precisely because it was sharing, clips from actual plays, like clips, animated clips from podcasts, things like that, like quick demos of games. People were just like discovering things on TikTok and like buying them. And so there was a big push of like marketing of RPGs in TikTok, and the beggar talk hashtag emerged from people who identified their content as begging people to play anything other than D&D. You know, just like the idea that we have like a monoculture of everyone thinking that like RPGs are D&D. And so much of the like the discussion being around like I don't like it when D&D players do this, or I
Oh
don't
boy.
like it when this happens in my D&D campaign. Like people who don't understand there are other RPGs
Sure.
kind of being like, "Oh wait, how do we fix D&D? How do I get D&D to do the thing that I want it to do? Or
Play a
how
different
do I
game.
get D&D to serve all of the you know, all of the needs of all of my players who are very different. They're like, how do I find a path forward for my player that wants high lethality and my player who wants their precious little, boy or girl
Florbo.
to
Yeah.
never have
Yeah.
something happen to them. And in some ways, D&D, the promise of D&D is that it is so robust that you can kind of hack it to do just about anything. Really, like if we take mechanic as metaphor, the mechanic of D&D is rolling a d20 and players have stats and abilities. And so the metaphor that is kind of communicating, its worldview, as it were, is the universe is random. We will we will mimic this randomness for you, but people can limit the amount of randomness they're subjected to through like hard work and experience and like
Sure.
understanding their abilities and things like that. There are plenty of other games where the mechanics serve different metaphors, and where sometimes like it is better suited to telling the kind of story that you want in a way that is satisfying. So I am not someone who like says no one should play D&D. I think that D&D is a wonderful, entry point for people. I think it does a lot of that kind of long form campaign stuff better than other games. I think it has like the cultural momentum that it's easier to find like tools for people playing D&D than a lot of other games. But I think largely we are at a point where D&D is the Kleenex of role-playing games. There are a lot of people who will ask you for a Kleenex when what they want is a tissue. They have a runny nose. They don't give a shit about the brand. They just know to ask for a Kleenex because, it's
That's what it
Kleenexes.
is.
There are a lot of people who get interested in role-playing games, through one avenue or another, and they ask to play D&D because it is shorthand for that kind of experience, that kind of game. And sometimes they'll play D&D and they'll get frustrated trying to make D&D the game that they want it to be without realizing that, there are other things out there. And they might play something else and, go right back to D&D. It was like, oh, hey, now I have this game
Yeah.
does this thing in this interesting way, and now we can hack it into D&D, which is the game that other people I know play and understand and own the books for. But to go back to mechanic as metaphor, a great example of this is the game Dread by Epidiah Ravachol. So Dread is a horror game that is played with a Jenga tower instead of dice. And so as you play the game, you have characters. Each time you take an action, you're pulling a tile out. you are being chased by like a slasher style villain or like an alien or something like that, mimicking very much of the Final Girl style of horror genre. And if the tower falls, then the person who pulled the last block, their character dies. And so the mechanic as metaphor is that as the story is becoming more and more tense, the actual tower of blocks is becoming more and more precarious. And so it feeds into that feeling, which isn't to say that that is the only kind of story that you can tell with a jumbling blocks style of game. You know, Dread identified like, hey, this works really well because there are these like tipping points. And, you know, a player can even sacrifice themselves by intentionally toppling the tower so that the other people have better odds, the same way that a character will sacrifice themselves in a horror movie. There's a really excellent game inspired by Dread called Star-Crossed, and it is about star-crossed lovers. It is a 2-player game, and you are always star-crossed lovers who have an attraction to each other, but for whatever reason, whether it is part of like the world building of the game or some other expectation, you come at you decide the reason together. Like maybe one of you is a scientist and the other one is like the alien that they are tasked with studying or something like that. Or maybe you are in a society that does not approve of like, you know, interracial or gay dating or things like that.
Maybe Capulets and Montagues, you never know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you play the game and the tower becomes more and more tense as you play the game. You are only allowed to speak when your hand is on a block. So it like kind of mechanizes things interesting in that way. But when the tower falls, it is not like someone dies. It is, all right, this is the moment. Someone's going to say something. You know, someone is going to confess. They are going to put the thing that has been on the peripheries out into the open. And it's a really interesting game because of that. It's one of those games that has a lot of possibility to be, you know, a cute love story, but also it can be like a really emotional, tragic story of like something that ultimately doesn't work out. But what it does is like it takes that mechanic as metaphor and says like, here's a specific moment in stories that we tell where like the dam breaks or something changes, where like something can no longer be avoided, and incorporates it into the type of story that you're telling. Epodiah is also someone that was one of the first people that I talked to when I was getting into game design. Epi had like a YouTube channel where they would talk to people in other professions about what they did and was like, okay, that's cool. And so he had me on at one point to talk about dramaturgy, which was my career at the time as someone who was just like interested in games. And something that he said that really stayed with me is this idea that role-playing games, storytelling games, etc., are algorithms for emergent storytelling. So what you're doing is if you think of like your typical equation where you have values on the left side of the equal sign and like, you know, a question mark on the right or something like that. So you have the variables. It's like 3 plus X equals Y or something like that. And you're trying to solve for Y. The game's job is deciding that, all right, if X is player input, you know, of whatever like players bring to the game, the thing that the game designer gets to decide is the 3 plus, you know, or maybe it's like divide by this, multiply by this, like different kinds of factors, all these different kind of things. But a well-designed game is going to give you a result on the other side of the equation that is within a realm of expected parameters. And that realm of expected parameters might be the genre of romance, or might be comedy, or might be any number of things. Where it's like, all right, if I have designed a consistent enough game there are so many different ways that players could bring their own creativity into it, but they are reliably going to have, you know, this tinge on the other side. So going back to Starcrossed, it's like, all right, this game could be a tragic love story. It could be a love conquers all story. It could be, you know, like titillating, but it will always be within that realm of parameters of a love story, whatever that means for you. And sometimes with a game like D&D, where the mechanic is so robust, the equation is so large that it can go in so many different directions and you can get so many different things on the other side of the equation that it's not to say that you can't do things that are, you know, you can play a lot of different kind of games within the trappings of D&D, but there are so many variables. It's such a like broad system that unless you have conversations with your players where it's like, hey, we all agree that X is going to be 3 for this, right?
Yeah.
Like we could do anything here, but we want this result on the other side. So this area where it could be anything, we're going to reel it in a bit. And because some people don't take the time to like discuss and just like, well, everything's fair game, sometimes that works out. Sometimes the joy of playing the game is precisely the like helmet kicking moment of like, we understand D&D well enough to know 9 times out of 10 a campaign is bad. And so isn't it great that we achieved this really rare, like perfect, you know, this is the game that everyone talks about. This is the campaign we've been playing for years with the same people. Isn't this beautiful? Like they enjoy it precisely because they know it was not guaranteed.
Yeah.
But for other people who don't have the luxury of rolling the dice to like get to the good stuff, I think a lot of times in terms of like games accessibility is a lot more than just, you know, differences in like accommodations and things like that for disabilities. It is also the kind of lowercase a accessibility of can people afford to buy the rules to this game?
Yeah.
Or could a parent play this game in the amount of time that it is reasonable to have a babysitter? Things like that, that maybe make for a bit of like a easier to understand equation, but one that is like a bit more reliable. And the trick being just making sure that whenever there is player input, that player input is satisfying. Not necessarily that a thing needs to happen that they want to happen, but they should feel like they are actually expressing agency, that they are, you know, part of the story instead of the story being something that's happening to them.
Yeah, I mean, additionally, when you do have such a very large D&D as a framework, D&D as a schematic for telling any kind of story, it is difficult to put a bunch of people who have possibly, quote-unquote, infinite experiences, or, you know, X number of chimpanzees typing Shakespeare into a typewriter experiences, and being able to say, you can discover anything.
Yeah,
what?
It's a big promise. And for some people, it's really intimidating, you know?
And also, I think intrinsic in the act of discovery is that not everything will be satisfying, but there is an appetite for satisfaction and dissatisfaction in the quest, in the discovery, right?
Well, yeah, which also gets us back to like all of the different kinds of currency that are also wrapped up in not just games, but like leisure. I think there is a certain amount of expectations. Like, I spent money on this game. I spent time on this game,
Yeah.
it had better like return on that investment.
Yeah.
And sometimes like I think games can do a better job of not overpromising, of being like, I'm very transparent with people when they come to my booth at conventions that my sweet spot for a game is designing like the 30-page one shot, you know?
Sure.
I've got this game, Dating.sim, which is inspired by visual novels and reality TV, and is very much like, hey, this will teach you how to like do this kind of rom-com type thing. And it does it by playing the dating game and having some like shared control type stuff. But I'm very transparent with people. That's like, yeah, this is a game that ideally you will play it in one sitting. And if you fall in love with the characters that you create or the world you create, you can daisy chain them into other games, whether like a game that would do a better job of like the long form play, the zoomed out play, etc. And because I am so transparent with people that like this can be an introduction to role playing games, or this can be a mini game, or this can be a one shot, because I'm not trying to either create or sell them the last game they ever need,
Right.
they go in with realistic expectations. Whereas kind of the D&D Kleenex problem is it's not the most accessible game. I mean, even from a financial
Absolutely
standpoint,
not. Yeah.
not only is it expensive, but like there is no market incentive for Wizards of the Coast to make D&D more approachable.
Or easier
Because
for GMs
yeah,
or
because
anything.
the way that they make money is if you think of the core rule books as a platform, like you're buying a PlayStation when you buy the core rule books, they want to keep selling you stuff. And so if the core rule book makes it easy for you to run games all on your own or gives you everything that you need, then they're not going to be able to sell you like adventure books or expanded books. Like if GMing is intimidating, then there is a way to sell you a book that makes it less intimidating. And yeah, like I think that D&D is good for the hobby. The reason why we are having a boom in any kind of interest in role-playing games, the reason why I could have a career in this is in large part because of the way that 5th edition really resonated with podcasters, and things like Critical Role, Adventure Zone, etc., led to a real resurgence of interest in games, period. But I think that like part of the trick of being someone who does sell role-playing games. I am also out here trying to say to people like, hey, buy this other game. Or like, you
Sure.
own games of mine already, get this one too. And to go way back to the very start of our conversation, I think one of the tricks of game design is helping people discover that they can tell different kinds of stories and that that's fun too. Because I am not like selling a game to someone saying, this is the last game you ever need. And then a year later, I'm like, ooh, actually,
Yeah.
this one's like version 2. This is the last one
This
you'll
is
ever
Puffs
need.
plus lotion. Did you
Yeah.
know?
It's
Yeah.
saying to people, hey, I know you love telling your like murder hobo dragon stories. Have you considered telling a rom-com? Here's a short game that will open up that path to you. Or like, hey, this is a game that is about a very specific story. It's about the relationship between a pilot and their like AI mech that they've bonded with. My game Hounds is about that. So kind of having the promise be an ability to discover new ways of play, new kinds of stories in addition to what you're doing, instead of promising to constantly replace the previous game, or to take the place of like, oh, the kind of stories you like are bad, you should be telling these stories instead. Like, no, any of us could tell any number of stories. And a robust understanding of our own lives is seeing that like there are a lot of different genres that really flow through it.
Yeah, and I also think that currently the way that capitalism works is that there is a certain air of legitimacy that is lent to stories that are capable of operating on a XYZ grand scale or told with a certain system or whatever it is, right? I think that there is a preconceived notion, especially, I think I'm referring to things like actual plays here, is where people want to be able to follow along with the mechanics of a thing and therefore find access to a different game to be less interesting or fun or something of that nature because they themselves don't want to have to relearn what football means, right?
Yeah.
They're saying, I want to watch my team with my sport in my thing, and I don't want to watch a new type of game. I don't know. I don't myself purport to that, but there is also I think a ritual about the anticipation of discovery, right? Mm-hmm. Because the thing, like when we're talking about discovery, there is also, I think ritual is such an important part, at least for me, of discovery, because you were talking about religion previously, and I have a very Catholic background, and so there is a lot to anticipate about a certain ritual and about what is going to happen. And I think that a lot of games, especially a lot of extremely successful actual plays, have a ritual to them that feels like a person can anticipate what is going to happen based upon knowing the rules of the game and based upon knowing the mechanics of a game. If someone, for instance, I hate to use a D&D example in this scenario, but if you tell me that you are a divination wizard and you've got, some excellent rolls sitting there, I'm going to be anticipating, like, oh, when is this person going to use their natural 19 divination roll? And, like, when is that going to happen? I'm, like, waiting for that to happen. And so there is this, I think there is this very interesting moment that is happening in games because we are watching them be played in a way that is, how do I say this? It's not leisure. Mm-hmm. Like, games are leisure, but we are not, I personally do not watch a lot of actual plays that feel leisurely. They feel extremely well produced. They are tight. They have very cinematic expectations from viewers and also seek to fulfill the cinematic expectation, both story-wise, with mechanics, and also on a level of production that lends itself to needing 20, 30, 40 people behind the scenes. And so I think that the expectation that you're going to play, for instance, Dungeons and Dragons and have a cinematic experience is also part of the difficulty of transitioning from watching something that feels like a ritualistic religious experience that provides you a Hillsong level of emotion and music and, lighting and something to literally, quote unquote, believe in, and then asking you to generate a belief on the other end of that that's like, no, you bring this from yourself. Like, the belief in what happens in the story when you are playing the game comes from you. It does not come from external sources. It comes from the internal source of yourself.
Yeah, because it's very easy to watch Critical Role, and if you don't kind of keep in mind the larger apparatus of it, to be like, oh, the mechanics of D&D are what's responsible for this.
It's so easy to believe that is true.
To look at it, be like, yeah, because I have access to this same game, if I engage with the mechanics in good faith, the same thing will happen for me. I will have this big cinematic story, which, it's very easy to feel let down when that doesn't happen. And I think that, the same is true for, religion, belief structures, etc. Being like, well, if I memorize, the scripture, if I understand the ritual, then, that's enough. When so much of, no, it's also community, words without acts are meaningless, that kind of thing. And I think that there is a difference between, the produced kind of film narratives of really polished actual play. And I think that there's a place for that, the same way that there is a place for all different kinds of storytelling. But without getting too much further into a completely different other discussion, because we've already been talking for almost an hour and a half, is I think part of it is also kind of the way that our culture and the internet has really obliterated our attention spans. And also even just our schedules, of people are super, super busy. They don't have a lot of resources to kind of play around with. That I think part of people are really attracted to an actual play that is this is the best this could possibly go.
Sure.
I would rather watch this than play the game on my own, because some people just don't have the patience or the leisure to really discover what is satisfying about the more casual, exploratory, flip of the coin. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't style of play. But that's kind of one of the difficulties of the medium. I don't think we're ever going to design our way out of Reddit discussions of how do I solve this interpersonal problem at the table, or how do I find a good group? I'm new in a city and I don't have anyone to play with, and the pickup games at my shop aren't my style. There's always going to be an interpersonal part of games and an expectation setting level of games that is going to be messy because people are messy. And the attractive thing about, stories that we can consume that have more kind of spelled out for us or more spoon fed to us, they're still satisfying, but the satisfaction that you're going to get from that is different from the satisfaction of a role-playing game where walking on the tightrope is part of the draw, knowing that you are not guaranteed to have satisfaction, but feeling confident that you're going somewhere. I don't know. And all of this gets into different discussions, and I am by no means a games philosopher or anything. I just, those are the kinds of things that I find interesting to engage with as someone who does this for a job and doesn't want to become jaded with designing games or engaging with the capitalism of games, is keeping in mind all right, what are the unanswered questions? What can we do better? And also taking a bit of the pressure off my back of being I'm never going to make a game that's for everyone or that solves everyone's problem or that replaces D&D.
And nor should you.
I'd take the money. If I replace D&D,
listen,
I'll cash that check.
I won't know if you replace D&D, but there will be signs. There will be signs. But no, I think it's so easy right now in in this cultural moment, I feel like we are in a shift, but I think it is very easy right now to understand that a specific group of people inside of a corporation that has merged with another corporation are now trying to hold the keys to the ultimate game system that tells you what to think and what to believe and how to do it. And so, like, yeah, okay, buddy. Like, there's an infinite number of ways to play, and there's an infinite number of games yet to be born, and there are an infinite number of people that want you to play them, right? It's just to assume that there is some kind of paramount game or experience actually does a disservice to believing what you want people to experience. And it makes sense, talking about deconstruction, knowing who made Dungeons and Dragons, to understand that yes, you want to create a society that gives you an empowerment fantasy that allows you to do things that you normally would not be able to do, right? And gives you a certain set of skills that you wouldn't necessarily have, and allows you to build a person that can take on whatever XYZ hero's journey that you should decide. But also, I think the future, I guess I'll ask you. I have one question for you. One last before we wrap here, which is there is a gentleman that wrote a book called How to Fall in Love with the Future. His name's Eric Hopkins. And since I have read this book, I have been thinking about nothing but what to ask game designers about that, because game designers are systems thinking people. They give a shit about the systems of the world. So my question to you is, if games had a future that you could fall in love with, what would that future look like?
I think that it's one that's liberatory, which I think is like the joy of game design, is something that really spoke to me. Specifically tabletop game design is something that really resonated with me in my theater practice. There's an understanding of, what games are and what games can be that contextualizes them as a product that is to be consumed or engaged with. So that could be the big AAA video games. That could be the system that you engage with. It could be like theater is Broadway, being like, oh, the thing that is attractive about this to me is the spectacle or the money or those kinds of things. And all of those are like, I enjoy playing a well-made video game as much as anyone else. Sure. I enjoy seeing well-produced theater. But what I talk about when I say a liberatory future for game design is that tomorrow, the price of Xboxes could be quadrupled. You could be priced out of experiencing that kind of game. Or being like, hey, you need a system that, you don't have the graphics cards for because everyone's using it to mine crypto, that kind of stuff. I think what is liberatory about tabletop game design, about kind of like boots on the ground theater, devised theater, really any kind of folk art, and the idea of like art that emerges from a folk culture rather than like a professional practice, is that it is a practice rather than a product. It is the act of creating something, is the act of, letting the thing that you've created mediate your relationship with others. And so something that's very satisfying about teaching tabletop game design is that people are liberated to a degree to tell these stories. I am giving them the tools that they need to make their own game, or if they're engaging with one of my games, to like create their own stories based on that. The same way that when I was teaching theater, when I was teaching playwriting, the satisfying thing is like giving people the verbs, the toolbox. I'm not teaching anyone how to have a unique voice. You know, I can't tell someone how to think things that other people haven't before. But I can position them in a way that they are enabled, liberated, whether it's from their own like negative self-talk or their lack of
Sure.
knowledge, experience, to do something that is satisfying, that is helping them create, that is helping them, you know, feel like they're onto something, you know, to work towards something. And so I think that like a future of games that I would really be in love with is one that, you know, is enabling people to, you know, be their full selves, to kind of engage with a game on their own terms, whatever those terms are, and to engage with play and creativity and storytelling in a way that can be enhanced by, you know, capitalism, that can certainly be, you know, enriched by having other people design games that like take some of the pressure off them and free them up to engage with it on a different level. But people knowing that like they are not bridled to someone else's resources or creativity, that even if D&D disappeared tomorrow, that wouldn't mean they have to stop playing role-playing games.
Yeah.
And I think a big part of like creating that future isn't necessarily like, you know, killing the dragon, whether that dragon is Jeff Bezos or, you know, something else. But it is kind of like creating a culture of game design and a game design scene that is always better than we left it. And the thing that will make that true is equipping people to like leave their own campsites better than they left it, as opposed to like continuing to be like, well, I'm going to get mine and the next person who gets in will be lucky. To like empower people to, you know, engage with games, engage with game design in a way that like they feel good about supporting other creators, but they do not feel beholden to other creators, that like they are engaging with other people's ideas in like the most generous and the most like assumptions of like trust, rather than feeling like this is something I can't do, so I have to find the thing that best does it for me in a way that I like. So I don't know how we'll achieve that, but it's part of why like I would always rather be in a game scene that feels encouraged by there being more and more games and more people making games than feeling threatened by them. You know, I don't want to be in a games community that ever thinks that less games is better.
Hell yeah. That's awesome. Well, thank you so very much, Tyler, for talking to me. I know.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
For another like 68 hours. However, I do appreciate you so much. And thank you guys all out there for listening. This has been Tyler Crumrine. I'm Jackie Harris, and I hope the joysticks. Thanks.
Bye-bye.